Hey everybody, welcome back to World History. So this is section 2 of our notes on ancient Greece, the rise of the Greek city-states. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So to start us off, we're going to identify some major Greek city-states that are going to be of importance to us in this unit, especially the cities of Athens and Sparta. Those two are going to be two of our biggest players in this unit. Now, it's important to note about 500 BC, everything that you see up here that is in orange is what was under the control or influence of ancient Greece, including Mount Olympus. All right, so let's talk about some geography. So we're in the Balkan Peninsula. Now, mountains divided into isolated valleys. As you can see at this topographical map, most of Greece is that of mountains, with some massive valleys in between, with hundreds of small islands, especially out here. Now, there were many small city-states that were all cut off from one another, and they defended independence from each other because sometimes they would want to expand and incorporate other people in through force. So again, if we're looking at this, if I'm reading this correctly, I believe Athens is right in here, and then Sparta is over here. So the seas were huge for the Greeks, especially because they didn't have that much land that wasn't mountains. They relied a lot on trade for getting agricultural goods. It was a vital link to the outside world. They had a lot of safe harbors and skilled sailors that carried materials and ideas. They massively expanded the Phoenician alphabet as well. If you remember, I briefly talked about that last unit, in which they took the Phoenician alphabet and then added vowels to it. This expansion laid the base for all Western languages. So things like German, French, Spanish, English, all can be traced back to the Phoenician alphabet and the Greeks. Now, they traveled all over the Mediterranean Sea as well, even establishing colonies all over the place in what would become Italy and Spain and France, and down towards the south in Egypt, along with a lot of continuing contact with these major Phoenician colonies as well, especially the ancient city of Carthage. So when it came to governing the city-states, they had something known as a polis, which was designed with an acropolis, or a high city and a walled main city below. This was small, allowing citizens free residence to be involved in community triumphs and ills. If we're talking about Athens, the Acropolis is right here where the Parthenon is. And then the rest of the city of Athens would have been down below, as you see in this image here. So there was also a major change in warfare. They really began to use iron weapons, and they allowed ordinary people to become involved in warfare. It used to be you had to supply your own weaponry, your own armor, all that stuff. So it was something that was really reserved just for the rich. But they saw that everybody should have a chance to fight, because regardless of your status in the economy, you should and want to go fight for your country. Now, there was a major evolution of warfare as well, with that of a phalanx, which you can see pictured in both of these images. Now, that is a massive formation of heavily armed foot soldiers, typically with spears and shields, that could then form to protect a massive group of people and allow them to advance forward. Now, this led to the creation of two very opposite cities, which we'll start talking about now in a couple minutes. So, some early governments. We had initially were ruled by a monarch in Greece. So I had a hereditary ruler, central power, kings and queens, all that stuff. Eventually moved to an aristocracy, or rule by the landholding elite. But eventually, as trade expanded and the middle class arose, an oligarchy-style government was created. Now, an oligarchy is when the power is still limited within a specific group of people, but it represents a much larger portion of the society. Like I said, very powerful by a small, powerful elite group of people. Some images to add in there. It got to the point where the oligarchies were doing pretty good jobs of running these city states and establishing how things were designed to function. So we'll talk about Sparta first. So the Dorians who conquered Laconia, or Peloponnesus, which was down here to the south in the southern part of Greece, turned the conquered people into helots. Now, these are state-owned slaves that worked the land. Sparta would actually hold on to this concept. Their government was that of two kings and a council of elders who advised both those monarchs. Citizens were considered to be male, native-born Spartans over the age of 30. Now, the rigors of citizenship in Sparta, especially for boys, at the age of 7, you were removed from your family and began training for a lifetime in the military. It was expected you served in the military until you reached the age of at least 40 or 50. At age 20, you could marry, but you had to continue living in the barracks for another 10 years before you and your wife could eventually settle down and have a house together. Here's some images from modern day Sparta. Okay, so Spartan women were expected to produce healthy soldier boys, but they were also given the opportunity to inherit property, and they were also still trained how to fight. They were still trained on how to defend themselves to a point that they could basically hold their own. Now, Sparta and its neighbors, Sparta was very much the neighbor that nobody liked interacting with because they didn't like interacting with you. They looked down on trade, travel, new ideas, and wealth. Essentially, they didn't like anybody that wasn't like them. They were very much a xenophobic community, meaning they didn't want contact with outsiders. Now, if we jump over to Athens, it's like night and day. It is a very different city. It changed from a monarchy to an aristocracy. So again, power changing to the elites. There was a demand for change. There was massive discontent over the power of the nobles. So they then began to move towards a democracy in which the government was made and filled by the people. That's why we talk about the Senate chamber in Athens, which is up on the Acropolis. It really allowed people to actually start to have a voice in how the government was working. So somebody we need to talk about is good old Solon. Now, he was appointed archon, or essentially think like president or chief official, in 594 BC. Now, when he rose to power, he outlawed something known as debt slavery, in which if you were massively in debt, you were forced into servitude, into slavery. Now, he freed those who were sold into slavery to pay off their debts. He expanded rights for more people and had some decent economic reforms as well, including regulating the trade of wine and olive oil. However, his reforms led to the rise of tyrants in Athens, or people who gained power by force. There's an image of Solon for you, some wine and olives and olive oil. Some of his later reforms. The Athenian tyrant Pistrasus gave land and loans to farmers, which was a good thing. A reformer, Cleisthenes, broadened citizen roles in the government, so got more people involved. He created a genuine legislature that represented the people of Athens. This is the first example we have of that in the ancient world. So as a lawmaking body, they began to debate laws before deciding or to approve or reject them, very similar to our legislative process today. So there were still some limited rights as well. Compared to other civilizations, Athenians were actually very active in the political process compared to everywhere else in the ancient world. Again, that's because really in terms of the ancient world, they have our only example of democracy until we really get to ancient Rome, and that is still a good 200 to 500 years away. By today's standards, it was not many rights for individuals, but it was still a lot higher than it would be in most other places. Now, landowning men were typically the ones that had most of the rights. Slavery was very popular, and there were some limits to your rights as well as an individual. Women did not very much have rights in ancient Athens as much as they did in Sparta. So, like I said, women lacked status. They were relatively secluded. Education, though, was limited to those that could afford it. Unlike in Sparta, where everybody got sent off to military training if you were a boy, the only way you could get education in Athens is if you could afford it, and if you were a boy. Girls were not able to attend school and get an education. There they would study public speakers, go through military training and athletics, and learn what it was needed to be a man in ancient Greece. So how do they compare? So let me get all of this up here. So in Sparta, they had 2 kings and a council of elders versus Athens, which shows a limited democracy with an assembly of male citizens over 30. Sparta was very much a military society and had helots that were slaves, whereas Athens massively encouraged trade. In Sparta, they didn't like trade and travel. A citizen was considered to be a male, native-born Spartan over 30. All boys received military training. Girls were raised to produce healthy sons for the army. Women could inherit property, and military virtues and discipline were all throughout the society. Versus Athens, where they very, very much believed in trade. Women were inferior. Boys, if they could afford it, were educated in many areas, and they received glorified individual and extended political rights to more citizens. So it's kind of a balancing act based on what you would want as a person as to which city-state you would want to live in. So there were some forces for unity as well, that being that they spoke the same language, they honored the same ancient heroes, they also participated in common festivals and prayed to the same gods. Again, in ancient Greece, they prayed to the ancient Greek gods, things like Zeus, Poseidon, Aphrodite, Hera, that lot. And they shared a decent amount of aspects of their culture, so they could have easily unified. Now, the views of non-Greeks, Greeks held a high regard for themselves compared to other civilizations. They called everybody else barbaroi, which is the root for the word barbarian. This included the Phoenicians and Egyptians, even though at this time the Phoenicians and Egyptians had some of the most advanced societies in the world. Now, when it came to their religious beliefs, they were polytheistic. They believed that the gods lived on Mount Olympus, the most powerful of that being Zeus. You also have Aphrodite, the goddess of love, Ares, the god of war, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and the mother and patron god of the city of Athens. They built temples and festivals all over the place. They consulted oracles, priests, or priestesses, and received prophecies and quests. This is very much the ancient era of heroes. All right, that is going to do it for notes for today. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.